If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the creepiest thing you've seen in the middle of nowhere? I was hiking deep in a forest, sticking to the path. It was evening, sun low over the horizon. Making my way back out of the woods when I see something hanging in a nearby tree, so I went to take a look for curiosity's sake. It was a baby doll head. Looked up and there were hundreds of baby doll heads in the tree. The few I could see clearly seemed old with dirt smudged on them, but a few seemed clean and new. I heard rapid footsteps approaching and I hightailed it out of there. Why someone hung up hundreds of doll heads in a tree deep in the forest, I have no idea. Hundreds of bones from different animals up the mountains in rural Ireland. It is obviously normal to see a skeleton in the wilderness, but this huge pile of bones was just odd. Some were from sheep, but others looked like cats, dogs, rodents. It was bizarre as we don't have predatory animals in Ireland. The only thing that could have gathered/put them there was a person. I was driving across country alone on the 10, and was in the middle of the desert. My car said I only had about 20 miles left in gas, so I pulled off to the first place I'd seen for the last hour. Since I was young, sick, and a woman, I made the rule that any time I stopped for gas I would only pay at the pump and would never leave my car or go inside anywhere aside from the hotels I stayed at. So I swipe my card, and as it's processing, the transaction cancels and it prompts me to see the cashier. I try again, and halfway through typing in my zip code it cancels and tells me again to see the cashier. I look towards the convenience store and see it has broken windows, is boarded up, and is completely abandoned. Even the tall station sign is torn apart. I spot someone inside peering at me from between the boards, and the second I see them they jump away. They clearly didn't want to be seen, but kept trying to get me to come into the abandoned station by canceling the transaction. Nope. Got back in my car and by some miracle made it to the next station 30 miles away. An abandoned elementary school in the middle of the woods. I found it when I was around 10 years old while exploring at my dad's hunting club, in the backwoods of Alabama. The odd thing about it was that it didn't seem to have a road leading to it or even a place to park cars, but everything inside was from the 60s and 70s. It also seemed to be abandoned quickly. Books were still opened on desks, shoes still in the cubbies, and papers still on the teachers' desks. I actually took a lot of the books that weren't weather damaged and brought them home with me. I remember asking my dad about it a few years later, and he knew about it but said it gave him the creeps, so he never went near it. My dad left that hunting club a year later, so I never had the chance to check it out a second time. I was driving to visit my sister who lives in Missouri. It's late and I admit, I was a bit tired but not bad enough where I should have pulled over to a hotel. I get to this stretch of road where it's just cornfield on either side of me. I have directions to drive straight and take the next left. I drive, and drive, and drive, and drive. No lefts, but multiple rights. Every now and again there might be a left, but it's a small man-made road that wasn't big enough for my car. I start getting a bit confused on where I was supposed to turn because I'd been driving straight for like 45 minutes and still no turn in sight. I pass a left turn that was big enough for my car but was a dirt road. I figure, hell, that's probably it. I take the next right and end up driving around a ducking cornfield paved road maze. I ended up lost for about 2 hours before I finally found the small dirt road. I drive up it and find myself at a house. This was obviously not the right left, so I threw it in reverse and went to leave when I saw light from my field of view and movement. I look over and it's just a large group of people, over 10, standing around a fire and coming my way. It was like 3 a.m., I was lost, I'd been driving in a maze for about 2 hours. I was tired and I'd had enough for one night, so I drove off. I got lost again and ended up driving about 2 hours in the wrong direction, found a gas station, waited for morning and rang my sister to help me find where the hell she lived. As you can tell, this was before cell phones and GPS became super prevalent. Was DJing a wedding in a little prairie village about 100 kilometers from my city. Packed everything up once things wound down and was the last one out of the venue at 3 a.m. Started to drive toward the highway and saw a big orange glow emanating from the other side of a ridge on the other side of the railway tracks. Decided to check it out as it was so even and smooth. I had never seen a light like that before. Was thinking it might be some huge bonfire for the wedding's after party. Had to drive up 1 or 2 km to cross the tracks and crest the ridge, and once I did the light was still off on the horizon. Drove toward it for a few km but it didn't seem to be getting any nearer. Decided it wasn't a bonfire and I didn't want to get myself into trouble, so I turned around and headed back to the city. 50 kilometers later I got to the main highway, so I decided to look back and the light was just as big in the sky as it was back in the village. Looked at the news the next day and found out what had happened. A few underground natural gas storage tanks had ruptured and combusted, which caused an absolutely massive fire where there was no option but to let burn until it ran out of fuel. Ended up burning for 3 or 4 days. Would have been okay had I drove on to see the fire, but probably just as well that I didn't. It was very weird and ethereal seeing that light. It had such a quiet might to it and it was drawing me to it like a moth. I used to run bread for a big bread company and started at 3 a.m. I had to drive to a few remote stores in little towns surrounding my town. I was about halfway through the 50-mile drive to the next town. It was dark out and there are no houses around for a long way any direction. I look on the side of the road ahead of me and see a backhoe, which was odd in itself. Then I notice his bucket is super high, and as I'm getting closer I realize he is gutting a cow that is hanging from the bucket. Now I happen to have grown up around ranching, so I wasn't too freaked out. So for some reason I decided to slow down and see if this guy needs help. I can't explain this decision. When I stopped next to him he just smiles and waves, so I do the same thing and ask need a hand. He just cracks up laughing, like hysterical knee slapping laughing. For some reason I start laughing too. Now we are two guys cracking up laughing, one covered in blood, the other with a truck full of bread. The reality of this situation makes its way into my sleep-deprived brain and I hit the gas and get out of there. I thought about it and realized this guy drove a tractor into the middle of nowhere to kill someone else's cow. He was probably poaching this thing and he was just going to load the thing into the front bucket and drive this shit back to his house at ducking 3 a.m. Who knows how far away he has to drive this thing. No idea what the hell was happening, but the whole thing was pretty creepy thinking back. Creepiest and probably the most beautiful. Interstate 1 in Canada during December, in Manitoba. I don't know where we were. The bus stopped at a rest stop and we all got out to stretch out legs. Greyhound, not school. On the north side of the highway was a field of snow as far as I could see. It was so far and so still, with almost no wind, that the sky looked white, like it reflected snow instead of ocean. And I couldn't really see the divide between the horizon and the ground. It was like I was in the construct in the Matrix, just white, and like if I stepped off of the road I might fall into it. Gave me vertigo, but was really pretty and scary. Just vast cold nothing. Well, I have a few of these. First, I was driving to my friend's ranch for a New Year's Eve party. This was down in Eagle Pass, near the Texas/Mexico border. It was pouring rain and I was creeping down a back road, high beams on. Something jumped in front of my truck, stopped for a second, then darted back into the woods. It was about 3 feet tall, white, and briefly stood on 2 legs. Pretty sure Gollum lives in South Texas. Freaked me out. 2. An abandoned and torn tent in the outback of Australia. On a road trip up the west coast, we took a little detour inland near Carnarvon, see the red sands and such. Went down a dirt road, nothing for miles, and found a tent. We hesitantly approached it and saw that it had been torn open on one side. There was a filthy pillow and some scattered clothes inside of it, but it was still firmly staked down. Looked like it had been there a while. 3rd, back in Texas, out near Enchanted Rock. Walking around the woods with some friends when we nearly stumbled into a pit. Full of rattlesnakes. I don't know if you've ever seen a snake den, but they tend to ball up into a horrifying Lovecraftian nightmare. One night I was walking to my friend's house from my grandpa's. The fastest route was actually to cut through a trailer park surrounded by woods. There was a path if you knew the correct yard to trespass. Sneaking through a family's yard, I finally came to the edge of the woods, only to see 3 very distinct orbs of light about the size of softballs hovering in front of me. I froze and stared at them for some time, kind of squinting, cocking my head, etc., to see what the hell they were. I decided to approach them, and they flew away. I don't believe in ghosts or anything particularly supernatural, so I honestly have no idea what I saw that night. Okay, I got one for you guys. I live in a rural area about 30 minutes west of Palm Springs in Southern California. My cousin and I decided to go hike in some hills that are about 20 minutes north in an area called Oak Glen. There was no trail to get back into the hills. We actually had to trespass on a fire camp and follow a stream up toward the hills. We start climbing the hills and reach the peak of a particularly steep hill. I realize we are way away from where I parked the car, and I don't even know where the road is. On top of all that, there is heavy fog rolling in and we only have about 35 minutes of light left. We attempt to take a shortcut down the hill by sliding on our butts down a steep slope, and to our dismay we end up on the side of a 30-foot rock wall. Long story short, we managed to scale down the rock wall, but not before a football-sized rock falls on my cousin's head and he starts bleeding pretty heavily and seems a bit disoriented. We start walking the direction we think the car is in. The fog is heavy all around us now. We're not sure we're going the right way. My cousin is bleeding from his head and all of a sudden we come across this long 40-foot building with thick concrete walls set mostly below ground level like a bunker. In the middle of a forest? The windows had bars on them and the door was heavy steel. My cousin wanted to check it out, but I was getting a total bad vibe. From it. He was saying something was drawing him to it. I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I wouldn't let him go in, just a super eerie feeling. Shortly after we passed the house, the fog let up a bit and we luckily stumbled on a little foot trail. Years and years ago I went with a friend to visit his grandparents. We were late teens, not really middle of nowhere but sufficiently separated from civilization. There was a creek running between their property and their neighbors, and he wanted to go out catching frogs before we left. We've got about a half dozen in the creel when he spots a conspicuous pile of sticks and leaves at the base of a tree, on the neighbor's property, where someone had clearly tried to conceal something. Our curiosity got the better of us and we decided to check it out. It was a plastic freezer bag filled with straight-up child porn. I don't mean just naked pictures of kids or anything less than explicit children having sex or being raped. It was bad. We covered it back up and told the grandfather, who told us he'd notify the police and handle it. We expected to hear from the cops but never did, and more or less forgot about it. 10 years later the old man dies and his 5 daughters and some of their daughters come forward with tales of years of brutal sexual and emotional abuse. That goddamn stash was his, it had to be. I was driving back to school one fall. It's about a 12-hour drive and I was doing it all in one go. There is a lot of middle of nowhere and teeny tiny towns on this drive. I really had to pee and there hadn't been anything for quite a while. Finally there is one of those freeway signs with food, gas/lodging listed for the next exit. I'd been driving probably 9 hours at this point. The sign said there was a gas station and a fast food restaurant. Those have bathrooms, so I take the exit. Usually those signs mean there is something right off the freeway, but I end up following the signs for several miles and finally see the fast food restaurant. It's just starting to get dark. As I pull into the parking lot, this little cat runs in front of my car, but I'm going slowly enough not to hit it. Parking lot is empty and there isn't much around it, mostly trees. I get out of the car and see another cat. And then another. There are 30 plus cats that I can see, so probably a lot more I don't. There are 3 colorings, all black, orange tabby-ish, and a grayish color. So they vary in size, but other than that they look basically identical to the other cats of their coloring. They are all staring at me. I took a step forward and they all stepped back about the same amount as my step, and simultaneously. I stepped back, they all moved closer. I walk into the restaurant, get a drink, use the bathroom. I said something to the person at the counter like there are a lot of cats out there, but she was just sort of like oh. So I go back to the car and they are still there and sit up and stare at me again and shift positions as I move. This time I notice there are giant food bowls filled with kibble around in trees just past the parking lot. Someone is coming and feeding this cat colony often. And a lot of food. It was very strange. I got in my car and found the freeway. When I was about 11, we lived in an apartment complex with woods in the back that went straight uphill. A neighbor that we would talk to occasionally told us there was a cool playhouse or abandoned house and he pointed in the direction. A few days later my little brother and I walked in that direction. We came upon what really looked like a shallow grave and an old kid's sleeping bag. The grave was a patch of ground which seemed indented about 3 inches, like sunken in from the rest of the dirt around it in a very deliberate rectangle. The sleeping bag was off to the side of the clearing and it was old and tattered. My gut told me to get the duck out of there ASAP. I wish I would have told someone. Hope it was nothing. A few years ago a friend and I went to explore a nearby limestone cave. I had been there before but never gone very deep. I had read of a waterfall which eventually led to an expansive area beyond, so we set out to try and find the path. Since we've never been on this route, we took turns going forward and checking back to avoid passing points of no return without one of us being above with a rope to toss down. After the familiar route was behind us, we found a tight climb down. The squeeze was like going from the front seat to the back seat in a compact sedan that's vertical. No problem. Next we found a tunnel, wide but short. We took off our packs and dragged them behind our feet while we crawled maybe 10 to 15 meters. It was getting a little claustrophobic, but we knew what we were getting into. We came to a small opening about the size of a half bathroom. This space we could stand in, and so was a bit of a relief. The path forward was a small square tunnel the same height as the previous route but maybe 2 meters wide. We jokingly called it the coffin crawl. This route required us to go one behind the other and led to a 90-degree turn. At the turn I could see the path continued on past the range of my headlamp, but mostly all seemed level and safe. At this point, slowly it became apparent the path was getting more narrow ever so slightly. If we wanted to turn back we would have had to crawl backwards single file. I could not speculate how far we crawled, but it seemed like a very long ways until I could see a small opening ahead, maybe the size of a cramped coat closet but 2/3 the height. At this point that space was looking pretty comforting because it would mean we could at least turn around if we decided to go back. Right before the coming closet-sized space was the tightest squeeze I've ever tried in a cave. I had to place one arm ahead and drag one to get my shoulders to fit diagonally. As my light illuminated the closet space, I could see a single stalagmite in the center and some bats resting on its walls and sloped ceiling. Small mouse-eared bats were infrequent but not a shocking sight, until our voices disturbed them and they decided to exit. Past our prone one by one bodies. Their fluttering should have been non-threatening, but in combination with the inability to GTFO it became very unsettling. It took a lot of mental control to avoid panicking from the lack of space, apparent lack of air and astro heebie-jeebies. After the bats had passed and I had caught my breath and sanity, we entered the small opening. Upon the single stalagmite was a small note, the torn corner of a piece of notebook paper. The note read in blue pen, "Nothing here." We had not found the path we sought, and instead found nothing. Me and a group of other summer camp counselors occasionally take walks around camp down old paths in the forest that haven't been used in a long time. The camp was founded in the 1920s, so it's quite old and a lot has been forgotten. One night we were walking down a path and came to some opening that we'd never seen before. It was a small field with no branching off paths. In the center was just a simple kids' table. One that little girls use for tea parties. It was surrounded by 4 chairs all pushed in. It was also covered in a bunch of leaves, which was weird because it wasn't under any trees. No one had any idea how it got there. A few weeks later we came back and all the chairs were gone and the leaves were brushed off. Just the table in the middle of the field. None of us have gone back since. Didn't see, but heard. Was parked at the end of a gravel country road that was near a cave with my fiancée, making out, when I heard really heavy breathing. I looked at her and she looked at me and we both realized that it wasn't either of us. Scooted into the driver's seat as fast as I could while grabbing my pistol, dropped it into drive and sped out of there. We've been married for 16 years and still bring it up every now and then. No idea who or what it was, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So for those wondering, this is my story. My father, my brother and I were crab fishing deep in the jungles of Puerto Rico, a new place we had never gone to in an effort to get some lucky finds of crabs. We had to go through an initial barbed wire boundary to really get where the crabs were, and after that, we split up in an effort to cover as much ground as we could. We spent so much time that I found that the sun had set and the forest was so impossibly dark, if no light was on, you couldn't see anything beyond 3 feet in any direction. All alone as I trekked deeper in, phone in hand as I was readying during the down moments where I couldn't hear any crabs rustling about in the bushes. I came across an odd cement foundation which, after looking it over, it was just an abandoned house project which never got past the cement floor and a portion of wall. Off in the distance of this place, I found a complete cement structure which was overgrown with vines and completely isolated from anything human related. I took a picture of it from the outside before starting to investigate it. Obviously, with my college of terrible horror movies, I knew that I should be very careful when peering my head into one of the 3 compartments it had. In hindsight, horror movie knowledge should have told me to just bolt out of there and get company. From what I could tell, it was supposed to be a lavatory which never got completed. Weird thing was that in the first room, there was a square toilet-like structure with an incredibly bad smell coming from it. Cockroaches were all over the place, which made me legitimately frightened that some might fall on me. The room in the middle was just an empty square, though the third had the layout and square of a shower room. What was really odd about the whole thing, aside from what I'd already seen, was what was in the square toilet of the first room. I peered inside with my flashlight, and there was an entire room underneath the entire cement structure, about a 12-foot drop underneath the cement square. There was some trash down there, but the smell was much stronger closer to the hole. I tried to see as much as I could, but there was only a dirt floor 12 feet underneath the actual floor I was standing on. The weirdest part about that was, I looked around the entire structure and there was no way to the underground chamber except through the square hole of about 2 feet wide. I heard some rustling happening nearby, and though I checked if it was a crab, I knew that I needed to leave already, and I did. I was camping about as far away from civilization as it's possible to get in the UK. Decided to do some fishing on a nice day. I had a clear view for miles and someone managed to get near me without me noticing. Bright red huge coat on a hot as ball day. I tried saying hello, nothing, tried saying hello in all the broken bits of languages I know, still nothing. My attention was taken by a fish taking. I turned away and back and he was gone. No idea how, or where he disappeared. The high school I went to has a bunch of woods behind it. I lived in rural Ohio, so cornfields and forest were of no shortage. It was common for the cross-country runners to take their runs through parts of the woods during practice. My ex was part of the team and would take runs through the woods frequently. At one point she told me that if you take an hour or two to meander through the woods, there is an abandoned playground somewhere in the middle. Not really in a clearing, but just built into the woods. Like someone just stuck the equipment where it fit. She told me stories of how the runners would avoid that area and go around it in a wide circle if they knew they were getting close. Supposedly as you got closer to the grounds you would start to hear footsteps behind you that would get faster as you approached the playground. Me being a high schooler and dumb, I grabbed my friend and told him we should go to this place to see what's up. So we did. Took a stupid amount of time to walk there. Really was an hour or so before we got there. When we got there we didn't hear any footsteps, so we started to think it was all a rumor started by the runners. The only equipment there was a 2-swing swing set and one of those merry-go-round things that bullies strap nerds to in movies and spin them around. Since we had walked all the way there, we decided to take a load off and hop on the swings for some harmless fun for a few minutes. So we got on the swings and went about our business. Everything was cool for about 2 minutes. At that point we were swinging at close to the peak of our swing height. As my friend swings backward and is coming back in his down swoop to go forward, right when he hits the ground where the swing normally just sits, his swing completely halted. Like it was grabbed by someone from behind saying, "All right. Time's up." Just halted. Mine continued to swing, but I saw that and jumped the duck off. My friend and I bolted the duck out of there shitting our pants. As we ran away we started to hear those footsteps on either side of us. Fast at first but diminished once we got far enough away. Went on a midnight walk with my girlfriend. The park by her house had a dirt trail that led up a small mountain. It was about a 30-minute walk to the top, but the view overlooking the city was gorgeous. At the top, the dirt path became paved concrete with a small sitting area. We stayed at the top for about 30 minutes. Upon leaving is where things got creepy. As we started to head back down, at the point where concrete met dirt path, there was a large pile of trash bags in a crescent shape in the corner of the path's intersection. It was not there when we first arrived. The pile was much too large and in the way for someone who likes to cut corners of paths to not notice. My GF remarked at how the shape resembled a dead body and asked me if I noticed it on the way up. I was very sure that it was not there 30 minutes prior when we arrived. I was extremely sure. Nonetheless, there was no reason to freak my anxiety-prone GF out, so I laughed and said yeah, it's been there and was probably just trash. Visibility was extremely low, probably about 5 yards. I didn't want to freak her out, but I was pretty tilted. I got heckled for being drunk and not listening to her. But in actuality I was looking and listening for any sign of people around us. In my own head I was telling myself that I'm just being paranoid, that it was probably there and I didn't notice. But at the same time I was also sure that it wasn't. I'm sorry I didn't have time to listen to your story about Jesse from work. I'm worried about our safety ATM. We made it back to our car without running into anybody. And I kind of laughed at myself for being so worried for nothing and also felt the relaxation of my butt muscles that had been clenched for the last 30 minutes. A few days later, the local news covered a dead body found near a park in Anthem. At the top of the mountain, guys, it was actually a dead body. Literally getting chills just typing that. It was actually a ducking dead body. Thank FSM that my GF didn't watch the news or she would have shit herself. One time when I was maybe 8 or 9 we were driving through the woods when we saw this guy on the side of the road. He was wearing like a dressing gown and he was holding a teddy bear or a pillow or some kind of stuffed toy. He was just staring into traffic from the side of the road, and we all freaked out after we drove past him. We called the police when we got home because he could have been some old guy who escaped from a nursing home or something, but it was still really ducking creepy. Okay, so, I used to work third shift at a blood processing center out in the middle of bumduck nowhere. On my way home at around 4:30ish in the morning on a back-ass windy road I saw something off in the distance. It was a dark figure but I could tell it was pretty big. I can't see very well at night to begin with, but this particular night it was really foggy out and so I was squinting to try to see what was up ahead and didn't realize how fast I was approaching it. I had to brake kind of hard and swerve to miss it. It was a giant ducking pig that was standing in the middle of the road. Now, this honestly isn't what I would call creepy, but holy shit, it scared the duck out of me. Shit was as big as my car. When I was a teenager my family left our suburb and moved to the outskirts of a city in the rural, East Bay area, right off of the San Joaquin River Delta. The road to our old house was an unpaved, gravel road with one street light. Our house was the last house at the end of an endlessly empty block. Beyond our house were miles of fields and river. At night it was pitch black and nothing for miles. One time my ex-girlfriend and I were leaving my house pretty late. We always had to drive slow because the road was so bad. We were approaching the only streetlight on the road when, in between the random dirt mounds, old tires, and tall grass, there was a woman dancing under the street lamp. She was completely oblivious to us, and seemed to be having the time of her life. It was the creepiest thing I had seen to date. She was so happy, and yet it was such a sad state. I think she was drugged out of her mind. She had sunken in cheekbones and curled in lips, which suggested most of her front teeth were gone, among other things. She kept dancing in the lonely, pale, yellow street light while we drove away in the darkness. I was staying with my aunt, uncle and cousin in 2008, and we got invited to a 50th wedding anniversary. It was being held on a golf course / country estate kind of place a little out of the way. My cousin drove me and her there, and my aunt and uncle left about half an hour before us. We got onto the country lane that leaves our town, a two-way road with no pavement and woods on either side. There were no other cars around. All of a sudden, walking on the opposite side of the road, in the same direction we were going, was what appeared to be a World War II era evacuee child. Wearing a navy blue peaked hat, navy blue rucksack, gray shorts and gray socks pulled up to the knees. We both reacted at the same time, saying something like, "Oh my God? What the duck?" We doing about 40 miles per hour, so we weren't going really fast or anything. We both got a good look and we both saw the exact same thing. It was night time, by the way, pitch black, other than the lights of my cousin's car. I consider this to be my only paranormal experience. It was very, very creepy. When I was 11 years old, my great-grandmother moved in with my grandmother due to her being older. She was 87. We still had possession of her house as it had not been put on the market yet. We were cleaning out her house of all of her stuff. My whole family was there to help as it was a big house. 2 floors and a finished basement. Mind you, this house is located in a very, very rural area. All 6 of us cousins, ages varied between 9 to 17, had nothing to do and tried watching TV, but there was no signal to even use an antenna as no channels even came in. So we just played outside. I always had noticed playing there that it was a very wide open space of land surrounded by woods. I always had a very uncomfortable feeling when being there, as it was miles away from another house. There were no light posts or any lighting of any kind for when it got dark outside. It was down a road that ended in a dead end and was surrounded by no other homes, just wilderness and woods. My great-grandfather had a hunting stand deep in the woods behind the house. He had passed away about 7 years before, so no one had been up there since. It got late and the sun began to set, not dark enough to need a flashlight, and, being young and bored, my younger cousin and I decided to check it out. We started to walk towards it and we heard a creaking sound. We thought it was a critter of some sort, so we continued on further into the woods. As we got close, we noticed what looked like a reflection coming from the shack. We froze and said nothing. Then we saw a head peer out of the shack and just stare us down. We screamed so loud and ran inside. My parents asked what was wrong and we told them everything. They went out back and found no signs of anyone being there. The most bizarre thing is that there was no way anyone could get up there, as there was no ladder or even a rope. My mom later told me my great-grandfather took the ladder down, that way no one could get up there when he stopped hunting. I am 17 years old now and have not been there since that night 6 years ago. I know it was eventually sold. All I remember about that person was that they had the biggest brown eyes just staring me and my cousin down. She never went back either, and we don't even talk about it anymore. This isn't a joke, I'm totally serious about this. Okay, so this was the final straw that made me leave Louisiana for a while. We were driving down the highway between Killian and Springfield, 2 tiny little towns that we were told had a lot of KKK members. Load of trees, load of open fields, not many people. A really trashy looking pickup was pulled over on the side of the road and we slowed down because that's the safe thing to do. A few yards from the truck, 2 white guys, each holding a gun, and a black guy, holding a shovel, were walking. White guy. Black guy. White guy. Like they were guarding him or forcing him to walk or escorting him something. It's not unusual to see people walking in that area. There are bridges over tiny rivers and people fish there or get on their 4-wheelers and drive into the woods with their guns to hunt or whatever, but for 2 white guys with guns to be walking with a black guy with a shovel? No explanation. It was just eerie and strange, and my first thought was, holy shit, they're going to make him dig his own grave. I got the hell out of Dodge about a month after that, visited some friends. In that same area, we found a ratty old Bugs Bunny nailed to a light pole. It wasn't there the previous evening, but the next morning, Bugs was staring us in the face. Help me. Help me. I was driving back to a lodge in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi that I was staying at with a few co-workers. This was very late at night, as I was coming back from spending all evening in actual civilization 40 minutes away. I had been on dirt roads for a while in pitch black and suddenly came across a cop car with its lights off at an intersection of two dirt roads, and one lone cop standing in the center with a flashlight. I got totally freaked out and sped up and went right past him without stopping. No idea what that guy was doing out there. I wasn't sure it was even a real cop. I later found out from the news that there was a murderer dressing as a fake cop with a fake cop car shooting people. Who knows if this was the guy or if perhaps it was a real cop keeping an eye out. Mississippi is a weird place, and I won't return. Several years back my cousin and I, 14 and 13 respectively, were wandering through a heavily wooded area off the beaten path of a camping resort. Being the adventurous kids that we had been off the trail for at least an hour, just trekking through the sticks, having a good time. Eventually, one of us noticed something ahead of us. Something rectangular and dark blue in a sea of green. At this point I'm extremely curious, the odds of someone taking the same path we did through the woods isn't that great. Like I said, we weren't following a trail. Upon reaching the mysterious object we discover that it's a big Rubbermaid tote with the lid on it. We both look at each other, what the duck is this thing doing in the middle of nowhere? We spent a few minutes talking about whether or not we should open it. Who knows what could be in there? Eventually, we decided to give it a go. Neither of us expected what turned out to be in that thing. It was filled to the brim with Legos. Nothing but Legos. Someone, probably two people, given the size and weight of the thing, had carried a giant Rubbermaid tote of Legos into the middle of the woods. Why? I wish I knew. It goes without saying that together we carried it back to our campsite and got much enjoyment out of it over the next few years. I was driving through Wyoming to visit my family. I decided to try and just drive until I got there, no sleep. I pull up to an Arby's in a good-for-nothing town called Evanston. It was about 4 a.m. at the time, and in the middle of winter, so it was very cold, certainly too cold to be outside for much longer than a few minutes. I walk from my truck to the door, and go in. Now the strange thing is, I don't really know, but I've never been to an Arby's that was open this late, so I said to the man at the counter, "Damn good on you for staying open this late," or something like that. The man at the counter says it's for the locals, they like to be here. I didn't really care about any damn locals right then, I just really wanted my roast beef sandwich and some Jamocha shake. I order the food, and I sit down to eat. 10 minutes after I sat down, the locals the man at the counter talked about came in. If you're familiar with that part of America, you know that those towns are usually filled with white people who make a hard living. And that's what I expected. But when I turned and saw the locals, it was a group of men who were all at least 6 feet 8 inches, and very big. There was about 8 of them. It was really late, and I thought I was hot shit, so I tried to joke with them and said something like, "Oh Jesus, did the Broncos offensive line just walk in here?" All 8 of them in perfect unison turned their heads to me, said something which, as far as I knew, was in German, and then they ordered in perfect English. I finished my meal and walked to my truck, and that's when it got really weird because there were no other cars in the lot, so I don't know how these giants got there. And like I said, it was freezing. WTF goes on in Evanston, Wyoming, and I don't really care to find out. When I used to live in Spain, there was this old abandoned farmhouse. There was this sort of bone graveyard in one part. It was filled with various bones from sheep. Skulls, jaws, ribs, all sorts. In the garage there was a rusty old tractor. Anyway, one day me and my friend were biked down towards it, and as well got closer to it we could hear a loud banging noise. Sounded like someone was hitting the tractor with something. We slowed down a bit and then the noise stopped. Then we saw someone appear in the window. We ducking shit ourselves. Stupidly we hopped off our bikes and ran behind some bushes instead of turning around and biking away. After about a minute of freaking out, we just ran for our bikes and got the duck out of there. I didn't look back, but my friend said he saw they were still there and just staring at us. We never went back there again. I like looking through abandoned houses, and since there is a lot of development near where I live, there are a lot of houses to choose from. Until recently, the weirdest thing I had seen was an empty house that had clearly been empty for years, but it still had old, moldy washing hanging on the clothesline. Who goes to the trouble of removing furniture from their house but couldn't be bothered taking their clothes, they just went to the trouble of washing. A month ago I found something even weirder. There is a medium-sized 1950s house that is left on its own, with all of its neighbors demolished for a new housing estate. What got my attention though, was there were still cars in the carport. There was a flat-tired Volvo 740 GL and a Versus Commodore. Intrigued, I had a look around the house one night, and aside from one of the 3 bedrooms being completely gutted by fire and the fridge being empty, the whole house was completely as if the owner just left. Glassware in the cupboards, family photos on the wall, clothes in the wardrobes. There was a sewing machine on the dining room table as if someone needed to quickly fix some clothes. It looked like someone had looked through the cupboards and helped themselves to some alcohol, but aside from that the house appeared to have been abandoned in 2009. It was then that I realized that the only way for the house to look like this was if the owner had moved into an old folks' home. Or if they hadn't survived the fire. It was definitely time to go. I helped a friend move to another town in the early 2000s, out in the countryside. It was really late when we finished, but I just wanted my own bed, so I decided I'd make the 2-hour trip home. Halfway home, on a 2-lane road with no lights, in the middle of the countryside, I see what I thought was a motorcycle coming up behind me. The road was really straight and I could see them from a long way back. But it was closing on me really fast. I checked the mirror a second later and it surprised me how much ground it had gained. I decided to just hold my speed and not make any sudden moves and just let the bike go by. I thought it was a sport bike fooling around on country roads. But when it got a bit closer there was this terrible howling sound. Something about it sounded big, if that makes sense. When it was right up on me I realized it was an older massive pickup truck. Like one of those big ones with the 4-door cab. It only had one good headlight, and I just saw it for a moment, but the front was mangled. It was severely damaged, and the one good headlight was shining crookedly up into the side. The front was crushed in a way that the grille formed a sort of grotesque frown. The engine was making a terrible noise, the sound of a big V8 at very high RPM but dying. As he passed me I could see smoke was pouring out of it. Something about it was very disturbing, and still disturbs me to think about it, to be honest. It was just such a shock to realize at the last second it was this huge truck. And whoever was driving it was going as fast as they possibly could. Oh, and it had no brake lights. The road stretched out straight ahead for miles, and I coasted down slower as I watched the beam from the crooked headlight bouncing around and stretching out towards the sky. I never saw them again, but it scared the hell out of me. When I was a kid, my parents dropped me off at a local indoor pool at the far end of our small town to spend the afternoon. I ended up leaving relatively early and decided to go for a walk in the surrounding areas instead. No woods or anything, mind you, just huge empty expanses of Canadian nowhere. I ended up coming across, from a distance, 2 people lying in the grass. A larger woman and a very overweight man, both in their early 20s. The man was lying on top and they were facing away from me, and my adolescent brain went, oh, they're making out. I stayed a good distance away because I was worried they'd see me, and also because the man on top was moving around quite a bit and I wasn't really sure I wanted to see unattractive people ducking, if indeed that was what they were leading up to. It did look an awful lot like very slow sex to my young mind, except that as an adult I realized that the angle wasn't right for this to occur while they both still had pants on. So I'd leave for a bit and come back every 15 minutes or so, wondering if they'd have gone or if I'd get to see breasts or something. Each time it was the same, the overweight man squirming around on top of this woman, her legs together and her lying still. It took a while before I realized how unnaturally still she was. In fact, she didn't move at all, hands at her sides limply while his face moved around her face and neck. I was deeply unnerved. I kept coming back and checking, pacing in panicked circles around the walking paths in the area, and trying to come back from different angles, highly difficult because, again, open plains. No longer did my adolescent curiosity accept them to shed their clothing in an isolated field. I just wanted some assurance she was okay. I never got that assurance, lost track of time, and went back to the pool, where I was screamed at and grounded for making them wait. They refused to listen to anything I had to say. It's a strange mental picture to this day. There's an old gravel road, not too far from where I live. It cuts through the woods between the back roads of my hometown to the interstate. Pitch black, no lights at night. I love scary shit, so I like to drive that road. I work nights and it's the quickest route to work. I've seen a few things back there that have freaked me out. One was a random guy in the middle of the night riding a bicycle. No lights, no reflectors. Pitch black aside from the headlights of my truck, and he's back there riding as nonchalant as can be. The back roads of my town have a lot of lower income houses, so he was likely just heading home, but it caught me off guard. Once, in the middle of the day, there was a woman pulled to the side of the road, right bordering the trees. I figured she was stuck and pulled over and offered to help. She said she had someone coming, but she lived right up the street, wanted me to give her a lift to her house to pick up a chain. The whole time she was talking, I was getting a little creeped out. She was very insistent. And on closer inspection of her car, it wasn't visibly stuck at all. I made an excuse and got out of there. Someone lit an old sofa on fire, burning there surrounded by dead leaves. I called the fire department and waited for them to arrive. My favorite was the refrigerator, though. I was driving home from an ex-girlfriend's house, and right after a particularly sharp curve there was a fridge, chillin' in the middle of the road. The road gets used a lot as a dumping ground, so it was by no means uncommon to see stuff like that, but in the middle of the road in the middle of the night? I didn't even slow down, noped right the duck around it and kept on my merry way. All I could think was, what if someone was waiting in the trees for someone to stop? Easy setup for a mugging. On the flip side, just the other night I was driving down there and there was a random stray dog booking it as fast as his little legs could carry him, running from my car. He kept looking back in terror as I was coming. I guess I was his personal horror story, lol. Had me slowed to a crawl waiting for him to brake left or right. Finally he got out the way and I was able to make it to work on time. So nothing amazingly scary, just kind of unnerving stuff, I guess. Buried somewhere, but this one is easy for me. About 15 years ago, my parents, my brother and I are driving around the countryside looking for a way back to the highway after going to see a house outside of the city. The vegetation is mostly tall grass and dead trees, and the dirt road isn't lit at all, which at night gives the surroundings a kinda eerie feel. My dad's Nissan Primera is making his way through countless deserted crossroads, and we are lost AF because there was no GPS back then. As we are arriving at another crossroad, we see there's something in the middle of the road. It looks like a baby carriage. As we get closer, my father slows down on the side of the carriage and my mother starts shouting. There in the middle of the road is a beat-up baby carriage on its side, and we can hear a baby crying. My mom is going, "My God. The baby. Get the baby." And as she goes to open her door, my dad punches in the gear and does one of those movie moves where the car slides a bit and does a gravel kick. He basically wants to haul us out of there. My mother is still crying and screaming, her door half open, and my brother and I look back just in time to see 4 guys jump out of the tall grass on the side of the road holding planks and baseball bats and other weapons. We eventually find our way to the highway and stop at a gas station right at the entrance. My father tells the gas station attendant what we just saw, and the dude goes, "Oh yeah. The gypsies. Those guys are always doing that to steal cars and money. They basically put a baby doll in a carriage, and when you stop the car, they jump out of the bushes and jack you for all your shit." We never went back that region.